and you're good to go.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Amy Koritz. For those of you who don't know me, I direct the Center for Civic Engagement at Drew University, where I am also a professor of English. However, I have not been doing much in the way of teaching English or English literature for a while. For the past 18 years or so, I have been working almost entirely in the civic engagement field, connecting academic learning with action for the common good. So today we are going to hear from a number of alum and parents whose career paths have in many ways taken them in directions that serve the common good. And they are going to talk to us a little bit about those pathways and the many ways in which we can integrate our professional roles with civic, community, global benefits for society and others, and also perhaps ways in which we might continue those kinds of commitments on the side of our professional roles. And so we understand that we are more than the work that we do. We are also citizens of our communities, our regions, our countries, our world. So without any further ado, I would like to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. And because there are many of you, I think I will just call out a name and let you get started. So Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. My name is Mark Grillo. I'm the Director of Athletics and Supervisor of Business Education at Mount Olive High School. It's a role I've recently come into. I was just appointed in January, and actually it's a role that I didn't think I was going to have when I graduated from Drew University. I was a political science major and a business management minor. I had the intention of going on to a career in possibly politics or in international law. I studied abroad in Belgium while I was at Drew. And once graduating from Drew, I went to work at a law firm, Doogie Hewitt and Palatucci and Christie, as a paralegal, where I not only learned a little bit about law, but I also learned a little bit about politics, because Chris Christie was one of the attorneys there in that law firm. And I got to work on a presidential campaign for George W. Bush. And I found out that I did not want to go into politics. So after about a year as a paralegal, I decided to go to Seton Hall Law School. And I went to Seton Hall, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the law school, but I just found I wanted to do more. I was an athlete at Drew University. I'd done a lot of coaching for Coach Leonis. I worked a lot of camps, and I really missed coaching and working with students and working with kids. And I decided that instead of pursuing a law career, I was going to get an MBA. And in talking to Coach Leonis, he started to discuss with me an option, which was to become a graduate assistant coach while also getting my MBA. So I took that route. I went to Wesley College, where I got an MBA in management while also being an assistant coach there. So I got my education for free, and decided that I really did enjoy coaching, and I wanted to continue doing that in some way. But if I was going to go into business, if I was going to use this MBA, I wouldn't be able to coach. And while I was the assistant coach there, our head coach left. They offered me the head coaching position, which I turned down because at the time I hadn't completed my studies, and I thought I wanted to possibly pursue a different route. So they hired another individual, great guy. He was there for a little while, and he passed away that spring while we were working together. And I was just his assistant. He passed away. I became the interim head coach, and I really did find that was my calling in coaching. But I decided that I was going to coach a little bit of college, and then I missed home. I missed New Jersey. I was down at Wesley College in Delaware, and I started to ask around. And a few of my friends and contacts that I made back here in New Jersey told me, why don't you come up and be a high school coach and become a teacher? And I had an MBA, so I could teach business courses. So an opportunity arose at Morris Knowles High School to start the lacrosse program and become a business teacher. And I was there for 16 years. and I loved it, and that really opened up avenues. So Drew University, through athletics and through Coach Leonis, actually opened up my love of coaching and my love of the sport of lacrosse, and helped me to pursue that role as a coach for over 20 years. And now I've parlayed that, going back and getting my second master's degree in education, and I'm pursuing this opportunity as a director of athletics. I don't want to take up too much time, so I hope that wasn't too long.
No, there's a lot of richness there, so I'm sure we can dig into it some in the Q&A. Thank you for that. Kevin, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. My name is Kevin Hagan. I graduated from Drew in 1998. Right out of college, I wanted to be a basketball coach and a grad assistant, but my path took me to politics and government and public service. I started working for then the mayor of Woodbridge in 1998, soon after graduating. The reason I got the job for then Mayor McGreevy, who eventually became governor, was my teammate and friend Chad Bridges, his father, introduced me to the idea of going into public service and working in politics, and introduced me to Jim McGreevy, as well as a number of other folks. Since that time, I worked in the mayor's office, I worked in the governor's office, as well as the Democratic State Committee here in New Jersey, and also served as chief of staff to the current Senate President, Steve Sweeney. Seems like eons ago, back in 2011. Since 2004, I, with the exception of the stint with the Senate President, I've worked as a government affairs lobbyist here in New Jersey, maintaining most of my work in the legislative and regulatory areas and arenas in Trenton, with a little bit down in Washington, D.C. I currently am a partner at Princeton Public Affairs Group, which is New Jersey's largest lobbying firm. After Drew, I had no intention of going back to school, but I did get a master's degree eventually in Masters of Public Administration from Rutgers University.
Great, thank you very much. Caitlin.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Caitlin Scanlan. I graduated from Drew University in 2006. I have a degree in studio art and art history, and today I'm the Chief Development Officer for Cafe Reconcile, so I'm using that degree every day. I came to Drew really not knowing at all what I wanted to do for my studies or career path, anything. I was ready to let the adventure sort of guide me. And I wanted a true liberal arts education to figure out what that would be. And even upon graduation, I had some ideas of what I thought would be interesting in the art world, but none of it was a particular calling. But I did participate in a lot of civic activities on the college campus. And so one of them was I spent every winter break and every spring break building with the Habitat for Humanity chapter and taking a trip. We did some projects in Paterson, New Jersey and in Morristown, but then every break we took a trip. Once a year we would go to Sea Island, South Carolina, and then on spring break we would travel somewhere. We went to Hawaii one year, we went to different parts of the Gulf South. And so my senior year was the months following Hurricane Katrina that impacted the Gulf Coast. So in March, we did a spring break trip down to Slidell, Louisiana, which is on the north shore of New Orleans. It was a part of the epicenter of the disaster. And I spent a week building there and decided that that was where I was supposed to be. So I had a job lined up through my art degree connections that I quit when I got back from spring break. And I wrote a letter to the Habitat affiliate and said, I need you to give me a job because this is where I'm supposed to be. And thankfully they did, because it was a terrible idea in hindsight having done that. But So I worked with that Habitat affiliate for 5 years doing disaster recovery. My first year was coordinating volunteers. We would have 250 volunteers a day from all over the country. And through that, the affiliate, which was being managed by the international headquarters, groomed me to go into building the first ever fundraising shop for the affiliate. It was a tiny affiliate that had one part-time employee prior to the storm. With the influx of money coming in, they were building 80 houses at once. All these volunteers were coming in. The entire area was under recovery. And I got this incredible grassroots education. They sent me to the Lilly School of Fundraising through a grant from the Pew Foundation. And so I got a deep dive in fundraising, and then I had, the boots on the ground experience of managing millions of dollars, building homes for people who really needed them. And so I was there for about 5.5 years. I did a little over a year at an affiliate in Fairfield County, Connecticut, which was totally different, moving to a part of the country that has so much more wealth, and the disparity between the haves and the have-nots it was just a dramatically different way of fundraising. But I realized in that 1.5 years that the Northeast is not the place I want to call home anymore. Even though I'm originally from Massachusetts, I every day realized that I wanted to be back in New Orleans. So I moved back in 2012, and I worked my way up through a development shop at Volunteers of America, which is a national human service organization. I left there, and for the last few months, since August of this year, I've been the Chief Development Officer. So I lead a team, and we are fundraising for a workforce development organization. So Cafe Reconcile is, we help young people, opportunity youth who are 16 to 24. They've been disconnected from education or traditional employment, and they are looking for a way to get back on a path that helps them break them and their families out of poverty. So we do that by giving them life skills and occupational skills. And we have a working cafe. We are, as I said, I'm in New Orleans, so I'm in one of the hotbed spots of the COVID pandemic. So we're trying our best to be safe and mindful, but our young people are in a critical amount of crisis. So my job has had an interesting turn in the last few months, but I'd say if there's one thing that I can tell you, your Drew liberal arts education 100% prepares you for whatever job you land in, because you pick up all these different skills, and you learn to be creative and a critical thinker and a really good writer by having a liberal arts education. And so regardless of where you end up using those skills, you really have a good foundation to tackle any project. So it's nice to meet everybody.
Thank you for that. I need to say that I'm a huge fan of Cafe Reconcile. I was in New Orleans for 19 years before I came to Drew in 2008. So I totally understand the pull of that city, besides which the food is incredible. So thank you for that. Carole. Is Carole here? Hi.
Hi, everybody. My name's Carole Gaudet, and I am not a Drew grad, I'm a parent. My daughter is a sophomore at Drew, and delighted to be here. I graduated from Smith College in 1985. Smith's a small liberal arts college, pretty similar to Drew, pretty close to the same size. I was a history major, and the first thing that I did out of college was I went to China for a year and taught English. China was a lot different back then. I was in a pretty rural place, which today is a big city. I came home to a recession, and was working for my family's business. We had a retail store, and love my family, but man, working with the family can be challenging. So I was kind of desperate to make a move. And I just, started throwing darts and saying, okay, I'm going to go to law school, which in retrospect, I should have gone after an MBA, but I went to law school, really didn't enjoy it that much. Law was not for me. Got out, got married and had kids. And what I really wanted in a career, I wanted to spend some time at home with my kids. And then I wanted to have a career which was going to allow me some flexibility while my kids were still little. So in another example of bad timing, I decided to leverage, I also had a master's degree in environmental law, and decided to, instead of going into law, I decided to go into marketing for clean energy, sustainability, clean technology, stuff like that. And I built the business by myself by getting on the phone and making calls. And I remember the first day I picked up the phone and started making calls, it was in September of 2008 or October or something. And somebody, I happened to be talking to a friend, and she said, "Hey, did you know the market just crashed?" It's like everything's changed. So I'm thinking, okay, here I am again in this position. And I said, no, this has to work. What am I going to do to make this work? And the silver lining was, for me, if the market's crashed and everything's changing and there's mass layoffs, then people are going to need somebody like me. People are going to need a small, little, nimble solo shop who they can hire for fast projects, and they'll bring me in, and that's what I told myself. And I just told myself, this has to work. And that kind of attitude, I am not going to fail, got me to survive. Over the next several years, I worked for everything from tech startups to Fortune 500s and everything in between. I worked in tech, energy, social impact, higher ed, and that actually led me to a full-time job with the Tuck School of Business up here where I live at the border of Vermont and New Hampshire, where I got more deeply into social impact. And one of the things that I would say that I learned over my career is that, first of all, never let anybody tell you that you can't do something. And second, never let anybody kind of put you in a box. I had kind of started out in the environmental field, and back then, you kind of, people really cared how much time you spent in the environmental field, and you kind of had to earn your stripes and earn your cred. And so I was always trying to say, oh yeah, I've been doing environmental work for this long a time. But when I branched out, people started saying, hey, can you do social impact? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I suddenly realized there's this whole other world out here. It's not this narrow little focus that I thought it had to be. And I started realizing, sure, if other people think I can do all these other areas and contribute to other missions besides just the environment, sure, I can do that too. So that was a big learning for me. I am now at a small community hospital that's part of a larger system. I'm part of the Dartmouth-Hitchcock system. And so now I find myself working as internal communications producer for a hospital, and we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So that's been a huge, really inspiring time. And now I'm, after a career of working with liberal arts types, now all of a sudden I'm working with science types. And once again, learning that I can do that too. So I'll stop there, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. And it just so happens we have a science type with us, which might be a nice follow-up. So Saif, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Saif. I'm really happy to be here since it's because Drew had such a big impact on me personally, and so I love trying to give back. So I graduated in 2017, so not too long ago, and I'm now a student at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, as an MD PhD student. Currently, I'm in the middle of my PhD program, where I'm studying biochemistry, specifically doing work on HIV and looking at different ways to understand the structure in order to design drugs and therapies for long-term cures of the disease. And so I think rather than talking a little bit about what got me into the science of it all, I think one thing I wanted to speak to is the role that Drew played in my civic engagement, because I think one thing that I learned from Drew that I thought was really interesting, because I didn't think I knew it at the time, but the liberal arts perspective was really hitting me hard, because my scientific interests and my civic interests were very different. And I think it's because of that push for diversity that you get from Drew. While I was at Drew, I learned a lot of skills in trying to manage big projects. I was a civic scholar while at Drew, so I worked a lot with Dr. Koritz, and I learned how to work, especially with school districts was my main focus while I was at Drew, because my civic senior project was involved in starting a science fair among New Jersey middle schools and elementary schools, and bringing them to Drew to present on the scientific method and experiments like that. But after I got that experience with school districts, I was really able to make a sort of different social impact while I was at medical school, where I started getting involved in starting debate teams in the Baltimore school district. And I just got a lot of experience from being pushed into those experiences while at Drew on how to navigate that sort of bureaucracy and working with teachers and that. And I think that that was really impactful for me. I think that Drew gave a lot of that leadership style. I think I'll stop there, but that's what I wanted to stress at.
So it's a really important story about how multifaceted your experience at Drew is and how that leads you in different directions as you move on in your career. Julie, there are a lot of connections between your work and SAFE's research anyway. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you for having me, and greetings from the West. I feel like I should preface that I was born and raised in California and then came to Drew and then returned back to California. So for those of you who have questions about kind of relocating to a place that's not quite as connected, sometimes when you leave the Northeast, it's a little less connected in terms of community contacts and alumni. I'm happy to speak to that. But I graduated from Drew in 1997. I was a behavioral science major, which sadly I do not think exists. A interdisciplinary major, anthropology, sociology, and psychology. And for me, it was great because I didn't really have to decide, and that was an amazing option for me. I think, it's interesting to listen to others. Like Mark, I was an athlete. I played soccer at Drew, and I spent a year abroad. I was in Kenya for a year. But one of the things that I think is probably more common now, but was major specific then, was that I did complete an internship my senior year. It was part of my behavioral science major. And so I think my path probably has been much more linear in some ways than others. But hopefully it's also an experience that people connect to. So my senior year, I actually interned with Child Protective Services, so the DIFAS in New Jersey, in Morristown. And my goal really leaving college was eventually to become a social worker. And I didn't go directly to school. I knew I needed a break. So I moved to San Francisco, and I worked as a case manager for a number of years for a program helping women transition from welfare back to work. It was 97 and new legislation was in place. After a couple of years, I moved back to my hometown of Los Angeles and did a master's in social work at UCLA. And those 2 years while in that program, my focus was really around health social work. So I worked with children, pregnant and parenting teens, and then I worked in a community, both doing prenatal, in the prenatal program and doing HIV counseling and testing. So I became state and county and state certified in HIV counseling and testing. And then post-graduation, I worked for 2.5 years as a social worker at a housing program for families affected by HIV. And it was during that experience that I had the opportunity to work with a researcher, a UCLA researcher who needed folks for his study and had come to my facility to learn more about ways in which they could support families with HIV. And I really realized that there were ways to make change on a much bigger level. And so I kind of changed my direction from direct clinical practice at that point and went back to school. I did a PhD in social work at Penn. And while I was there, also did a master's in public health because I had been working for many years in health social work, and that just felt like a natural fit, and I am currently an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Southern California. And I continue to do kind of research mostly, but also teaching at both the master's and PhD level for individuals going into social work. And so I'm pleased to be here and happy to talk more about kind of direct clinical practice, but also how you can kind of take that professional degree and kind of wrap it back into an academic setting. It's been a great career path for me.
Thank you. Very interesting career path. Also, and last but certainly not least, Hannah, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. I'm Hannah. It's so nice to be here tonight. Like Safe, I also graduated in 2017. I was a women's and gender studies major, and going into Drew, I knew I was really interested in gender issues, but I wasn't sure how to turn that into a career, what that would look like. And I was really lucky that I found a lot of different academic mentors at Drew, and they really encouraged me to explore different avenues. So I just kind of got into the habit of saying yes to anything that came my way. And I think I found that the issues I cared about, gender issues, there was a way that it fit into everything I tried. So that's something I would say with social engagement. I think you can find a way to put it into whatever you do. So in my senior year, I got a part-time job at the UN because I made a LinkedIn account and I found the head of the gender team on the UNDP on LinkedIn. And I just sent her a message asking her to coffee. And I kept asking her to coffee until she finally did. And then she offered me a job. So shout out to LinkedIn, get on there, add me. So after I graduated, I continued on at the UN for a bit. But I was doing communications work mainly there, and I was finding that wasn't really speaking to me. So then I went and I worked for a reproductive health research organization. I really liked research. That was really fun. But I was kind of finding myself both at the UN and then at this reproductive health research organization drawn to the legal and policy sides of the organizations. And it suddenly occurred to me like, oh, I'm interested in law. I didn't realize that. So I decided to apply to law school. While I was in the process of doing the LSATs and applying, I was really lucky to get a year-long position at Drew's very own Center for Global Education. And it was so nice being back at Drew and back in my home community and serving that community again. And now I am at CUNY School of Law. CUNY is, I think, a really natural transition from a Drew education, particularly one focused on community engagement, because CUNY only focuses on social justice and public interest law. So I am currently there. I love it. I am focusing on gender law and law around LGBT people as much as possible. I'll be interning this summer with an organization that advocates for LGBT rights at the UN. Just a quick little thing, Drew's writing program has helped me everywhere I've gone. I learned to write at Drew, and I just can't emphasize enough how important that is in any career. And people are impressed if you can write. People generally can't write as much as I thought. It's just like, it's invaluable. So get involved if you can. I know Safe and I were both writing fellows together, and I know that that was big for me. So I highly encourage that. Thank you.
So thank you. We've heard from all of our panelists now. It's a very rich and deep array of experiences and learnings that we can garner from them. And I'd like to open up the conversation to our students who are here. We have a Zoom group chat. please type your questions there so we can be sure to address and gain as much as we can from the time that we have with the alums and parents who are with us. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, maybe we can just follow up with Hannah's last point, which was the importance of writing. Written communication is one of the transferable skills that we think about as we think about, the power of a liberal arts education and preparing us in a lot of different ways. And so I'm wondering what other skills our panelists would say have been particularly important for them as they moved through their careers that they gained from as part of their education at Drew. I don't know who wants to speak.
I'm happy to jump in. I was actually thinking about what Caitlin said and the number of, I think and I think others too, just taking opportunities to be uncomfortable and to try things that you don't know and to, I think, when I had looked over questions, writing was what I had put on paper as well. I think that writing has been the essential skill, but also communication skills. I mean, whether it was going abroad and being uncomfortable because I lived for 10 months in a place that was so different than my own home, whether it was, going to this internship and being part of communities and experiencing things that I hadn't done in the past. I think just being really open to new things, even when new things are uncomfortable, and taking those opportunities when they're available, but also just continuing to be able to work on kind of having a clear sense of who you are and being able to articulate that and grow from the experiences that you have offered to you.
Thank you so much. We've got several questions now coming up. One, which I think follows very nicely on the what you just shared with us, is what would you say is the hardest part of transitioning from being an undergrad student to having a full-time job? What is the biggest difference between undergraduate and being a graduate? Which experience helped you grow more and in what way? And we have some panelists who are very close to that transition and others who are looking at it from more of a distance. So perhaps we can take a couple of responses to that question.
I could hit the latter part in terms of the difference between grad and undergrad. For me, my grad school was while working full-time in the governor's office, and it was an executive program that gave you life credits, and I had classes on Friday nights and Saturday mornings. And unlike undergrad, they were not optional. You had to be there. You only had a certain amount of excused absences. And it's very difficult to balance your work responsibilities and all the stresses that come with that, in addition to then all the educational requirements for the master's program. And you're only, you have a snapshot of time with your professors. So if things are confusing, if they're difficult, you've got to figure out times that work for you and for those professors to work through those issues. And for me at that time, I had recently been married, had a child, and you're paying mortgages, tuitions, and still trying to do your work for both school and that. So all of life's balance is out of balance for that period of time. So my advice out of that experience is, if you know what you want to do and want to pursue a grad school degree, I would urge you to do it sooner rather than later, because it becomes more and more difficult to come back.
So that actually speaks to another question from Melanie. Would you recommend a person go directly to graduate school after undergraduate, or is it better to have some employment experience? So Hannah did that version. We just heard from Kevin that he would recommend actually not taking very much time off. But Hannah, would you like to speak to that? And at the same time, there was another question asking for a little bit more information about your internship this summer.
Yeah. So, okay, for the first question, I think if you know what you want to do and you know that it might make sense to go straight into a graduate degree, then to do so. Safe, I imagine for you in your kind of heavily like science-based field, like perhaps that makes more sense. For me, I didn't know that I wanted to go into law. And I needed to spend a few years working and figuring myself out before that made sense. I toyed with a bunch of different things. I thought about doing a master's of public administration instead of a law degree for a while. I thought of not going back to school at all. For me, it was really important to get that experience under my belt and to learn what I like and what I don't like before going on to get the education. And I really do feel like that's making my current law school experience a lot more enjoyable. I have a more focused idea of what I want out of it now. Castle, it's lovely to see you too, and I miss you. I will be interning at a place called Outright Action International this summer. They are an NGO, so they're not an agency in the UN. They're outside, and they are one of the few LGBTQIA focused organizations that have a consultancy status at the UN. So they have a more permanent presence there. So I'm going to be working with their UN team, sort of responding to a variety of legal issues. There's a lot of issues that are affecting LGBT people because of COVID right now. So I think we're going to be doing some emergency response to that. There's also a lot of meeting with both member states and UN agencies and advocating and drafting more LGBT-friendly policies, which can be easier or more difficult depending on which state it is. So I'm really looking forward to learning how to take that law knowledge and apply it in kind of a strategic way for the causes I'm interested in. And I'm happy to answer any more questions you might have. I think you have my information. If not, I'll get it to you.
Thank you. Now, Saif, you decided to go directly into your graduate program. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you chose your program and what drove that decision?
Yeah, definitely. So I think first I just want to touch on a little bit of what Kevin and Hannah were talking about in terms of the decision of going straight in, because I think that is something that has been discussed in among my classmates and in decisions that I've been thinking about after going straight through. And I think one of the things that I would recommend someone thinking about in deciding about going to graduate school or straight out is, are you ready to take advantage of the learning? Because I think one thing that a lot of people who went straight through, they said they felt that it was they felt not ready to really dive in again right after leaving undergrad and wanted a little bit of a break to understand the context in which they wanted to put the information that they would be learning. Obviously, there's a lot of learning in a lot of different ways, but I think how you're going to utilize that learning, I think, should play a role in what you're doing. For me, the reason I decided to go straight through was because I felt that Drew created a very nice sort of backbone of information that I could then use toward my graduate school. But I think in different fields, it would be very different. I think I'm in a lot more linear of a field where it's very direct as to, we know that you go to medical school and you go to residency. And I know that for law school and other degrees, it's much more complicated than that. So, and I can't really speak to that. But in terms of the other piece, and I think the second part of the question was how I chose my graduate school.
How you chose your program.
Yeah, so how I chose my program was actually a lot about the feel of the program. I think one thing that Drew made a big imprint on me is the environment is really important. I think that the interaction with faculty that I had from Drew was invaluable, and I still interact with many of those faculty on a monthly, if not a weekly basis from Drew. And I think that sort of drove my interest in making sure I had a sort of very a very community oriented environment, a very small environment, an environment that like fit that. I know that when I went to my first class that had 160 people, I'd never been in a class that large, and that scared me. So having a community environment in addition to that was really important. So I know that for me, the school that I chose while I was at that interview, it felt very family oriented. And immediately when I left that program, I knew I wanted to go there. And I think I was looking for that feeling because Drew has instilled a lot for that. So that's kind of how I chose it. I think also you have to consider whether it has the sort of opportunities that would allow you, at least for me, I was also looking at the environment in terms of I was very interested in urban sort of medicine and being involved in urban environment. So looking for a city school and being involved in city education was important to me. So the location of being in Baltimore was also a big part of my decision.
Thank you. And Julie, I bet you've got some wisdom on this issue as well.
I do. I'm going to reflect a little bit more on kind of where Hannah is, and that is as someone who reads applications and like is part of accepting people into programs. And someone who teaches, right? So oftentimes I have students who I call like, they're like in year 6 if they go straight through. And I do think there's two things to consider. One is, I don't know that you know what you want and what you don't want until you have an opportunity to try it. And so I always suggest that folks take some time to test it out and see if it's something they really like before they commit to graduate school. I think that I've definitely had students who kind of at the end of that 2-year master's period kind of realize this is not what they want to do. And that's a pretty big investment, both time, financial, to make for something that you may not love in the end. But we also, I know when we look at applicants, we're looking for life experience, for having had experiences. So I hear what Kevin's saying, in that like the further you go, the harder it is to return. There is like something about how our brains work, right? That there is a rhythm, and the balance of a full-time job and full-time school is a complicated ask. So that, he did probably the toughest route one can do. But we really value, at least in social work, in a profession like social work, and I know a lot of other kind of professional degrees, we really do value work experience. And so I think giving yourself some time to recoup from having had 12 years of school plus 4 years of post-high school education is useful just in terms of your readiness to learn. But also I think it's good to have to be in a work environment, different than an internship. And, so I would say the biggest challenge, because that came up, that I remember was not having breaks.
Mm-hmm.
I get to have them again. I'm back on an academic schedule, but that was the biggest shift. I remember that first December. Mm-hmm. For my long 6-week break, and that wasn't happening anymore. So I think that's, if there's a preparation to be done, it's for the fact that a regular job is usually 50 weeks a year, 48, 50 weeks a year, and so that I think was probably the largest transition.
Mm-hmm. And so thank you. That's important to understand, that the academic rhythm that you become accustomed to for so long is actually not the rhythm of the workforce, more generally speaking. And we have another question that's more workforce related. We have a student who'd like to hear about being a paralegal. What was it like to be a paralegal? I think this is for Mark.
Yes. Well, it was humbling, if I could say in one word, being a paralegal, actually, because I'd had a lot of success in athletics, and I wasn't ready to go to law school yet, as some people have talked about. I actually have both experiences. I had my MBA very early, 2 years out of Drew, 3 years out of Drew, and then I just got my master's in education last year when I have 2 small children, and I'm married and I have a full-time job. And I completely agree with Kevin. When you have a family to consider, if you can get it earlier, it's so much easier on you. I had a lot of late nights. I pulled a lot of all-nighters, and I, just trying to get papers done and research done. And I still had to go do a full-time job teaching and being in front of students. So, 1 or 2 of those days were very tough, but you get through it. Being a paralegal, I had no paralegal experience. I just knew I want to give law a try before entering law school. And I applied to, I believe, over 50 law firms. And I had about 13 interviews. And that was the first time in my life that I really felt rejection. I'd go into an interview. I thought I did great. I felt like, hey, why won't they, why wouldn't they want to hire me? And they'd say, you're not experienced enough, or we want to go with someone, different. And it was a little hard. It was a little hard, and it taught me to just believe in myself and keep working hard. If this is what I wanted to try, to do it, and somehow Doogie Hewitt gave me an opportunity, and then I worked with a lot of different personalities, and I had to be humble. Someone once told me a great leader must learn to serve first, and I had to serve a lot of different personalities, a lot of different people, and it really helped me to understand that sometimes it's better just to put my head down and work hard to get a goal accomplished, and accomplish quickly if it's an uncomfortable situation, if that's what's best for me. And it was great in that I learned a lot about law that the books don't tell you, a lot about the courtroom, a lot about depositions and working behind the scenes. And I got an inkling there that it was not the career for me. But best of luck if that's your path. And, it's definitely a noble one in some aspects, as well as very fruitful. So I hope that helps.
And it's a position that writing is important for, is that right?
Absolutely. Communication is a definite transferable skill. Julie was talking about it. Hannah was talking about the writing safe, I think, discussed that as well. The writing is so important, but just being able to communicate with people concisely. I don't know if I'm doing that well today, but concisely, and just different personalities, different genders, different races. I think that it drew, without a doubt, the liberal education helped to open my eyes to things that I'm a first generation American. I was raised in Newark. I didn't realize the diversity that there was, and Drew helped me to not only understand it, but to respect it and really to benefit from it. I think that's made me a much better person. It's helped me in my current career dealing with a lot of different students. We have over 1,500 students in our high school, and very different social economic statuses. And, it's helped me to communicate and work with a lot of different people.
So engaging difference, that's another really important skill that we seek to ensure students graduate with here at Drew. There are a couple of questions here for Kevin. And one of them, let me see if I can see them all. We have a question about how you would advise students wanting to go into state government as a career path, but not as a politician. And then another question from a student who lives in Woodbridge, so is interested in your speaking on your experience of working for the mayor there. And also, do you have any advice for anyone looking to follow a career path similar to yours?
Sure. The first one was about a career in government or state government, I think.
Right.
I really believe whether you want to be an elected official or not, and I've spent time helping folks become elected over the course of my career, both in legislative races as well as statewide races, and even as running for mayor of Woodbridge. I think that it's very important to understand what it takes to operate a government, whatever office that may be, as well as to respond to the constituents that you serve, and constituencies, vary greatly in any form of government. So what I would urge you to do if you want to look from a state government perspective is try to find, because there are usually fairly plentiful options for internships. Unfortunately, that does mean traveling to Trenton, which can be difficult because, transportation is not always the easiest to get in and out. But I would urge you to do that, whether it be in the legislative offices or if there's a specific area, Department of Health, transportation, what have you. Obviously, it gets a little bit more competitive and a little bit of less opportunities when you try to get into the governor's office. And I'd be happy to, anybody who's interested in that, I'd be happy to talk offline as to how to help you find those opportunities, and getting, in front of the right folks to see if you can make that happen. In terms of working for Woodbridge, working in local government by far was the most rewarding experience that I've had. And the reason being is that, you feel and see the impact each and every day for the people that you're serving. Not that you're not helping in other areas, but when you're doing it on the local level, you hear you hear happy residents, but you also hear the unhappy ones pretty loudly. And I always talk about the ability when, somebody's garbage was not picked up. When I worked in the mayor's office, I could have that garbage picked up immediately. And that certainly helped and made people fairly happy. When working in the governor's office, I always used to say that you're responsible for everything, but in charge of nothing because the operation is so big. So working in Woodbridge taught me first and foremost that without the constituents you serve, elected officials don't keep their jobs. And also understanding all the different constituencies that you do serve, from faith-based, from nonprofits, from businesses, from constituent residents that support you, residents that don't support you, and your neighboring towns, the competitiveness between similar sized towns. At that time, Woodbridge was the 5th or so largest municipality in the state. So you're always competing for transportation dollars, education funding, and what have you. So working in Woodbridge was a great experience. As for local government, the best thing to do is to volunteer first. I talk to people right now who want to get into campaigns, and obviously because of the pandemic, there's not a lot going on. I urge them, if you want to reach out to just a Drew student that I was talking to 2 weeks ago, I said, let's talk to Senator Booker's staff now, because you can make phone calls from your house. You can volunteer before, anybody starts to really hit the ground again, to set yourself apart. And that's what I would urge you to do with local government. Reach out to your council members and to your mayors and to their staffs to see what you can do and how you can help. Because sometimes the best opportunity is an unpaid volunteer job that results into careers. And I can give you countless examples of people who started out as volunteers, unpaid, and it worked out handsomely for them over their careers.
Which also speaks to the importance of building your professional networks. And in fact, I'd like to bring Caitlin and Carole in on this, because it seems like for both of your career paths, that was a crucial aspect of what you did. I mean, for Caitlin, you did in fact start as a volunteer.
Yeah, I did start as a volunteer. I would say, I'm just going to cover a couple topics. I have not gone to grad school. I would say when I first graduated school, financially, grad school wasn't an option on the table for me. And I think that's important to say for folks who are considering, do I go to work for a little bit or do I go to school? It's easy to take out a loan and keep going. I think you really need to think about the financial implications of that in your life. I made the financial gamble on Drew. Drew was my financial gamble, and it was a big price tag for my family. So I think before you go to grad school, and a couple of folks have said this, really know what you want that degree in. As Saif said, it was like a nice even line for him to go. When I graduated college, I was going down to Louisiana. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I was going to like the armpit of America, because I was from Massachusetts. I went to college in New Jersey, and you want me to move to the deep South? Like, I was taking a huge gamble, and Amy's laughing because she knows it's like a whole other world down here. But I was not ready to go to grad school when I first graduated Drew. I needed work experience. I needed practical time to understand what my skill sets were. I needed to understand that I was a good writer because of Drew. I think the byproduct of being a good writer, or sort of an input to being a good writer, is you have to be a good critical thinker. And a liberal arts education forces you to take a position and really understand why that position matters and have the context and the meat to back up that argument. So before work experience is a great thing to really understand how you operate in a workspace, which is what a lot of people have talked about, but also what your skill sets are. And then where you want that, if you're going to spend more money on a degree, where do you want that money to be invested? And so for me, I'm the chief development officer, and I have my job because of relationships. Part of my job as a fundraiser is maintaining and keeping relationships. So I practice professionally what I do as both my craft and how I live my life. But I mean, every job I've ever had, I got out of because I knew someone. So I volunteered at my first job. They hired me. My second job came because I worked with someone at my second job. They were a volunteer. My third job I got because my mentor used to work at the agency in New Orleans. And then the job I have now, I was recruited to by a fellow fundraiser who became an executive director. And we were in a financial pinch and we needed some really good fundraising. So he hired me. Relationships are everything. So whether you're in government, whether you're in the private sector, the for-profit sector, Hannah talked about stalking someone on LinkedIn. That's all relationship building, and how you respond and respect people, and you give them credit for the time they've given you, and you really listen to what they have to say, and you thank them for their time and value their time, goes miles and represents who you are and your character. And that'll override everything else that you'll ever do in terms of your work product. How you relate to people and appreciate what people offer you and help others, like giving your time back to other people, also really helps. So I'm the incoming president for the Association of Fundraising Professionals for our local chapter. I volunteer and mentor other fundraisers who are coming up to help train and develop them. And that means giving up time to run panel workshops and look at other people's fundraising plans. So I can't speak strongly enough to the practice of building strong relationships and staying in touch with people, even if it's as simple as going to grab a cup of coffee or calling someone on your way to work. I think that goes a long way.
Thank you. Carole, do you have anything to add on this topic?
Oh, let's see. Okay, folks can hear me. So your question was about building relationships, I think, right? And using that to leverage your career. So actually, when I started building my marketing business, I did not know a lot of people that I could ask for jobs. And I love what Caitlin just said about it's all about how you treat people. I just started picking up the phone and I said, what can I control? I can control how many calls I make a day. And it doesn't matter how many times I get rejected. It doesn't matter how many times I just leave a voicemail. What I can control is how many calls I make. So I just started looking for businesses that I wanted to work for that looked interesting for me. And I would look at their website and find the name of a person who seemed like that they would have work for me. And I would call them with a elevator pitch that I had crafted just for them, just for that person. Again, going back to what Caitlin is saying about valuing people's time. And I crafted enough elevator pitches that hit the target so that I was able to get work. And then from there, slowly started to develop my relationship, but develop a network of relationships. So having the courage to be too dumb to fail, having the willingness to get on the phone, and no matter how many times you're going to get rejected, just telling yourself somewhere out there is going to be the person who my pitch is just right for.
So being able to deal with rejection, which was something that we've heard from other panelists also, and have faith in yourself and be persistent and carry on, seems like an important, I don't know if that's one of the transferable skills, but it seems to me to be an important life skill that we gain from experience. We do have a question here that I'm not sure who this is best for. So anybody who feels moved to jump in, please do. How do you feel about the assumption that students who are interested in sociology, psychology, and fields of that sort will not make money? I guess it partially depends upon what you mean by making money.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think that, so, you know, social workers are not known to be high income earners. So I think, nor, by the way, many of our, right, we have teachers aren't particularly highly paid. We, you know, there's a whole group of public servants who, if we're going into it for the money, I think it's probably not the right fit. I do think that there's a fallacy in that it depends the route you take with those degrees. But I think it's important to go in eyes wide open in terms of what certain, you know, where the cap is, or where, you know, if there's a ceiling in certain careers, because there are, I mean, that is a reality. I think this, just to wrap into some earlier questions, or, you know, thoughts about kind of finances. You know, I chose to do my master's degree at my state university. And I think that I can't oversell that enough, that, you know, you want to be really thoughtful about how much it matters, where that second degree comes from, or if it matters, meaning that, you know, I think that we get sold very easily on the idea that, you know, X school or this name will give me more connections. But I think that very different than when many of us exited. And I will tell you frankly that Hotmail started the year I graduated college, right? So like, we didn't have internet. We had a very different college experience than many of you. You know, there wasn't LinkedIn, there wasn't any of those things. And so you just have to make choices that make sense for you, make sense for your family, make sense for your kind of life trajectory. And I think, you know, a couple of people have spoken to work-life balance. I also have children. And I do think that all of those things you want to consider kind of along the way. I do wish my husband did not go to Drew, but I just wanted to say, because I feel like it fits in here, that he has a BA, very similar to what Kate, he has a BA in poetry. And he does not work as a poet. But he does not have a master's degree, and he, you know, he kind of does little Don Drapery kind of pitching work stuff, but all of his writing. So there was a question that popped out about writing. Where do you get writing? Why does writing matter? I don't even know that it matters what kind of writing you have, right? Like it really, and by the way, he does much better than I do as an academic. So, you know, I will say that your starting point and your end point, and he too, like Caitlin, it was all relationships, and it was all kind of building and then moving. But I think that the writing just comes from, well, some of us came from disciplines where we had to write. We chose a major, and if you're not in one of those majors, it's actually just taking classes that require you to write. I do very much think that, I guess, wrapping in a third question, we do in graduate school, there is a greater expectation by your faculty in terms of your ability to write, and there's much less support. There's a higher expectation that those aren't things that you need a lot of support for anymore. And so I do think that it's really, it's a learned skill, and it's a skill that when you don't use is easy to lose. So any opportunities that you can get to, whether it's memos, whether it's, you know, whatever it is, to just kind of get your thoughts and be able to articulate things in a really, using a lot of causal logic, kind of ordering, and how do you make your case, very similar to what Carole was saying related to her pitch, right? She had to come up with a succinct, very linear way to kind of give her message, and that's a form of writing too. So I'm just thinking about all the ways in which your just daily life habits can incorporate those methods.
So
I would love to talk about the salary
Yeah.
piece.
go ahead, Kevin.
I would say this, when you're taking in from the context of social impact, it's free to help other people. So that's the first and foremost from that message. But I've had the opportunity to work extremely hard for extremely little amounts of money in my career, whether it be in government on campaigns, and I've also had the great fortune of making a good living along the way at different times. What I will tell you, as students coming out of college, the worst thing you can do is get into a rat race that tells you to compare yourself with how much you're making versus somebody else. Because the one thing that has held true for my 22 years, I guess, since I've been there, which is scary to say out loud, is that it's not about how much money I've ever made in my paycheck that has defined how much money I've made. What has defined how much money I have in my pocket is how many expenses I put on myself and what's left over after that paycheck. So when I pay all my bills and whatever I have left, that's all I have to compare, because I have friends who have made much more money than me, but they walk around with a lot less money in their pocket because they've spent it all. So make sure whatever you're doing because you want to do it, because you believe it is a stepping stone towards where your goals are leading you, and not because there's a comma in between different zeros, because you will find yourself chasing a dollar instead of chasing meaningful impact in anything, whether you want to help people or you just want to help your bank account. Trust me, it is a treadmill that never stops. So whether it's social work, whether it's education, I mean, we talk about having degrees and what we do. I have a degree in secondary education, history with a concentration in African American studies. That is not what you need to be a lobbyist in New Jersey. I can promise you that. So when you look at what you want to do, if you have a piece of like a sticky, put it up over whatever the salary number is. And if that description, and they're going to hire you to do what you're willing and what you want to do, figure out how you do the finances later.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that, Amy, I think Kevin hit the nail on the head. I think you're in your earlier years of work, like the best thing you can do post-Drew is hustle. Like get as much work experience and hustle yourself out. Be in different spaces, be in different conversations, take on the extra project and get that just like at Drew, Saif said it really well when he was like, I had this really diverse set of experiences from Drew. That's the best thing you can do, is throw yourself into the deep end of the ocean and try a bunch of things. The hardest part when you go from academic life to meeting a student to a job is you don't have these built-in framework of milestones that you have to achieve. All that goes away. And so sometimes it's projects, sometimes, like if Mark was saying as a paralegal, it was like really humbling because you're like, I'm producing a memo about what? Why am I getting you coffee? Like, it's a reality check, but what you end up doing is you start figuring out, what am I curious about? What am I interested in? You only figure those things out if you get a lot of experience. And so you're going to get to a point in your career where you can start to evaluate, where am I positioned in the field? So I do want to say one thing that is a little different from what Kevin said. I'm a huge believer in, and I've done this for myself. One, I think young people move jobs too much. You don't figure out what you're doing in a job if you move every 2 years and less than 2 years. You don't really get how that business is run. You don't really understand the minutia of how they change with the tide if you're only living through one budget season. So I think sticking it out a little bit longer to really understand nuance and ebbs and flows of a business makes a big difference. The second thing is, and that helps you build experience. So then the second thing is, you're going to get to a point, particularly for women, I want to just advocate really early on, you need to start studying your marketplace, because you are for sure going to be undervalued compared to your male counterparts. And I will tell you that I've been that woman in the interview that said, I'm not going for less money just because I'm a woman. And so you can have the opportunity to have a conversation early on where you set the terms of how you want to be an employee. And there are great tools and assets out on the internet that educate you on how to be a good negotiator, on what are the market rates in your field and position. Spend time on the hiring sites in your region and look at, say, like this organization of this size, they have this salary range and price point. Talk to other female professional organizations and start to weigh those things. But again, I don't think you're ready to have or prepared enough to take on those conversations until you've gotten to a certain point in your career. It really wasn't until the last like 4 to 5 years that I've been in a position, I'm a commodity now. I have enough experience and I have enough, and I'm sure Julie and Kevin and those and Carole who have been in their field long enough, you get to a point where you have enough experience and background and clout in your portfolio that you have a little bit of leverage and wiggle room. At that point, you have the ability to say, I want to be a good negotiator. I want to know what the market rate for my kind of position is, regardless of my gender or my race. And I'm going to go in there knowing what my price point is, and I'm going to stick to it. And if the organization is in a position to do that, given the value of their budget, and you can assess that based on their budget, and you can have frank conversations with your hiring team. If they're not in a position to do that, then maybe you need to ask yourself, is the experience outweigh the pay? And as Kevin said, 8 times out of 10, if the mission tugs at your heartstrings, the pay will never come close to the reward, emotional reward you get for the work. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a balance to say, I have value in who I am, that what I contribute to the mission, I want matched, because I do think your value proposition matters in that conversation, particularly for women and people of color.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to weigh in on this very kind of tricky question that can be really difficult to navigate, particularly if you're just starting out in a field? I will say that I had a guest speaker come to a class just last week who made exactly the same point about job hopping, that when she was hiring people, one of the red flags for her was people who hadn't stayed in a position for long enough to, in her opinion, actually get to know the company and the job. So just think very carefully about the value of that experience and the fact that it does take a while to get to know an organization, to get to know a company, to get to know enough about an environment to know whether or not it's the right one for you.
And any company that you're going to work for is going to view you, any company worthwhile is going to view you as an investment. And if they're looking at a resume that sees you popping around, because even a year isn't a long period of time when you're reviewing a resume. And the last thing I want to do is train somebody, put my time and effort into somebody who is going to take those lessons and move on to go somewhere else. You know, we're building a company, you know, we've been around for 30 something years. So we're building a company that hopefully everybody is a part of that foundation and not going to just be there for a little while. So, you know, you have to take that into consideration, one, before you take a job, and then certainly before you leave it.
So you would certainly want to have a job with a company that does see you as an investment, because that means they will be looking for opportunities to develop your skills. We have a question here about networking. How exactly does one open up and maintain the conversation? What advice do you all have for creating connections as someone with limited experience? So why don't we start with Hannah on this, because she has limited experience compared to most of us here, or Safe may want to weigh in also. How do you do this networking thing?
Yeah, so firstly, hi Artie, it's nice to see your name pop up here. So that's a great question. So I think, as many people have said here, yeah, I saw your comment, Artie. Hi. As many people have said here, job searching is so much about relationships, not just job searching, being in a job and maintaining relationships in your industry or even outside your industry. It's so about relationships, and people know that. And so it's really like people expect to be reached out to and asked to coffee and asked for advice. I found that when I started reaching out to people, at first I felt a little bit awkward, but then I realized all of them were expecting this. And I mean, like, that's why sites like LinkedIn now exist. I just always went in trying to be respectful of people's time. So even if I, ask them repeatedly to meet up with me, I would also, say, I'm happy to do like a 15-minute phone call. I'll take you out to coffee. I'll meet you wherever is most convenient. And then once you meet with someone, I always bring a list of questions with me that I'm really interested in, want to know, and I can sort of guide a conversation with that. And if there's a lull, you kind of have something there. But also people really like to talk about themselves. If you ask people questions about themselves and their career, I think usually people are kind of honored that you're asking them and want their advice. I know that like just the few times people have asked me for advice, as Amy correctly said, I have limited experience, but a couple of Drew people have asked me for advice, and it's been really meaningful to me to have someone ask that of me. And so I think like they're usually pretty happy. And if, the worst they can say is no or not meet with you. If they are meeting with you, it's probably not going to be too awkward a conversation. If you are worried, I'm always happy to do like a mock networking coffee with you over Zoom. Everyone here is obviously interested in your kind of career and personal advancement. So I think reaching out to people that are open to that is a really good idea if you're a little nervous at first.
Yeah, I think I just want to say like a quick thing, because I agree with what Hannah said from the inexperienced networking perspective as well. I haven't been involved in a lot of those professional networking events either, but I think two things that I've noticed to be really important in terms of networking is one, like the power of following up. I think like in situations like this and throughout like Drew, there were a lot of panels where they brought in other people. I think that was my biggest networking for me. I know that I met someone who did an MD PhD, and like that helped me figure out my application process just by asking for an email and emailing back and forth. And they were genuinely invested in finding, they asked me several times where I was deciding between, things like that. And I think that when you have an environment like this, following up, getting contacts, like anytime you have a friend of a friend of a friend, always make that contact, because that ends up playing a role later on that you won't necessarily see. And the other thing is the power of the email. I think in terms of writing, we've talked a lot, crafting a really good email is really important in terms of networking, and sending emails after interacting with people are really important as well. I think I've noticed that is like one of the big things in terms of me making connections is after I meet with someone in person, following up with them via email, kind of recounting what happened, where I met them in the subject, that sort of stuff really builds a relationship, and at least in the future, they'll remember you more for that context.
The most important thing, and unfortunately, a lot of my day is built around networking. The most important thing that people forget about networking is to listen, because Hannah is correct. Everyone loves to talk about themselves. It is amazing what people will tell you about themselves if you allow them to do so. But most importantly, when you're in a setting of 4 or more people, and they are people that you want to network with, you want to introduce yourself, allow them to then introduce themselves, and usually the conversation flows. Having questions that you may want to fall back on if there's a lull, but really allow folks to tell you about them, and find ways in that conversation how you may be able to engage in a follow-up. Because the people who don't successfully network try to do everything in that setting that they're in, whether it's a cocktail hour, a fundraiser, a party, or a walk in the park. And the reality is that that's the appetizer, and you've got to get to that main meal of a conversation. And I think you're right in terms of email, in terms of phone calls, in terms of, you know, the written note is still alive and well, and people love getting mail. So you want to use networking opportunities for what they are. Introduction of yourself, what it is you are doing or want to do, how that person can help you, you learn about it, and then set it up to what the next phase is. Because most people who are busy and that you want to meet with are in a networking situation that they've got to network with other people. So you want to take a little bit of their time and then follow up. And it's okay in that follow-up to be persistent, because sometimes people are busy and you want to make sure that politely you're letting them know that they are a priority for you.
Great, thank you.
Can I add to that? I really appreciate the comment about persistence, because it depends on what's happening, and there's ebbs and flows in every workplace, and sometimes it's easier to connect with somebody, and sometimes there's just a lot going on. But I think also, I just want, I guess, to add, or to on top of that, I would say to diversify who you're trying to, meaning that there are some people, I would love to tell you that everybody in the world is lovely and is going to be responsive to you, but not everybody is going to be lovely and responsive. Like, that's just not everybody's personality. And so to have like all the eggs in one basket and feel like if I don't make this one contact, I'm not going to have any success at all, I think is a dangerous game to play. So you should always be playing the field, for lack of a better way to say it, right? Try, you know, and if, you know, a couple emails go to this person and you just are getting nothing, like who else, who has a like job, who has this job in a different organization, even if it's not as, you know, perfect as a fit or whatever my perception is. Because what you want is people who are willing to give you the time and invest. And I think that that's more valuable than the fit being perfect, because if, you know, I think their goal is to help you figure out what you want, not turn you into them. And so I think if I could offer anything, it's just to say that sometimes those relationships or those connections come from very unlikely places. And so, you know, just to look in diverse places for those connections and that support.
So being open to unexpected opportunities, perhaps in your own mind, you had thought, well, I need to make this particular connection, but perhaps that's not the connection you need to make. And I'd actually like to bring Mark back in on this question, because you've had such a wide range of kinds of experiences. How have the relationships that you've built or over the years shaped the trajectory of your career?
Well, I think Caitlin said it best when she was talking about how many of her jobs that she's gotten have been because of networking or people she's met. I'm the same exact way. I think it's very important, especially as a young person in their 20s, to understand that you are a brand. And when you go out there to network and you're speaking to a lot of different people, you have to protect that brand and protect who you are, because people, especially in small industries and small small areas of they talk. We talk in education, and a lot of times if I have a candidate in front of me and that person is from Drew University, I have a lot of connections at Drew University, I'm going to find out about that person. So when you're networking, you want to make sure you protect that brand. When you have any volunteer work, you make sure you do the best job you can. You're respectful. You treat the janitor the same way you treat the president, because anyone you meet can help you network, or can help you with a position, can help introduce you to someone who's going to help provide an opportunity for you. The superintendent at Mount Olive spoke to my graduate class one evening, and after he spoke, you know, we had a connection through lacrosse. He was a former lacrosse coach. I had no idea. After the meeting, we just spoke, and I sent him an email afterward just saying, hey, it was great meeting you, great talking to you. You know, hopefully we can see each other again down the road. And when an opportunity opened up, I sent him an email and say, hey, no, just reaching out. We spoke before. I'd love to come in and talk to you. And just having a few minutes with him to reconnect, he's like, oh, absolutely. That gave me an opportunity. Then I had to show why I was the best candidate for the position. But sometimes that's all you need. One little connection from the past, one little opportunity to help open up the door for you. So I don't discount any relationship. I always tell everyone, I also, like Kevin, I talk to a lot of people about networking just because of my position and the opportunities. I have a lot of job opportunities for a lot of different coaches and teachers. And I tend to remember, even if they're not right for one position I have, maybe they'll fit in somewhere else at a later date. If they're a great candidate, you know, I'm going to remember who they are. And if they do a good job, I'm going to remember that. So always protect that brand. Nothing is a one-off. And I think that's very important to understand.
Excellent, excellent insights. So that's really important too. When you send that follow-up email, that says something about who you are, what you value, and what you're going to be like if you come and work with that organization. You're going to follow up on the emails. So I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that these, you know, communications, which we might think of as casual, or we might think, oh, I don't want to bother them, I don't want to waste their time, they don't really care about me. That's not really the right way to think about it. It's really thinking about it more as you're a human being, I'm a human being, we're going to treat each other with the respect that we deserve, and I'm going to show you who I am by the way I interact with you. Are there other comments on any of the questions or themes that have come up in this conversation? Any more advice that any of you would want to offer? Any more? I'm not seeing any more questions coming up in the chat. I suppose if I could ask one, well, maybe I'll just stop and see if there are final words or comments that any of our panelists would like to bring to the table.
Amy, if I could just like to mention one thing, and that is, for any graduates, anyone who's looking for a job, interview skills are incredibly important, and you don't get those without actually going on interviews. So even if it's for a position that maybe you don't think you're interested in, maybe it's not the perfect fit, go for the interview practice. And in any career, I think that's vital, definitely in our career in education, because just in this last position as athletic director, I went on 4 interviews. My last interview was much better than my first interview. So I stress, you know, resumes, make sure you have someone looking over your resumes, make sure you, you know, those writing skills really come in handy, have someone look those over, and practice your interview skills and your people skills. Because sometimes you could be the smartest person in the room, you could have the greatest resume, and if your interview skills are poor, there's no way you're going to be getting a job.
So interviewing, like writing, is a craft. It requires practice, right? You're not gonna be a great lacrosse player just by reading about it. You've actually got to go out and get out on the field. And it's the same thing for writing and for interviewing. Other comments?
And I don't know if Caitlin, you want to follow this, but I left Drew and I decided I was moving to San Francisco, and I landed there and I found some roommates and we figured it out. And I think it's also that you don't always have to, I think to take the adventure if that's what the wind is moving you to do, and recognize that, again, the first job doesn't have to be the perfect job, and you tend to land. But I think there's so much, the world is big, and so to take the opportunities that are available and around, and if that means you move to California or you move to New Orleans, I think it's opportunity. It was great for me when I went to Drew to be so far outside of my norm, meaning growing up in Los Angeles, it was just really different to go to the Northeast and to kind of the small liberal arts. But I remember that many of the people that I went to Drew with were really from the tri-state area. I mean, and many of them have remained there. And I do think that we have this amazing diverse country that we live in. And so if you have, and there are people from Drew all over the place. I ran into an alumni, somebody that was a couple years ahead of me one day at our kids' preschool. Turns out we live 4 blocks away from each other and our kids were in preschool together, right? I mean, there's all sorts of weird ways that the world becomes very small in a good way. So, but you know, I think just to not be fearful and to put yourself out, because amazing things come when you take those opportunities.
Thank you. We do actually have one more question, and this is one that's probably on the minds of a lot of graduating seniors. How do you think the pandemic will affect those graduating going into the workforce? So those of us who, you know, were around in 2008, thinking about either our children or ourselves, I think Carole mentioned this coming out of 2008. What are your thoughts on how
I would,
yeah, go on.
look, I think, you know, the true answer is it's unknown. You know, folks who grew up and they wanted to be in a big office and, you know, in a skyscraper, that may not be the reality, because right now you're looking at people working very successfully from remote locations and home. So the office setting is probably going to change dramatically. But I would also urge people not to allow the pandemic to start changing their activities and what they're doing to try to put themselves in a position to get a job, right? You want to continue, you want to be safe, but you want to continue to go down those avenues for your career, and not put anything on pause, because this pandemic may actually turn out to be a opportunity for you in some fashion that you don't know or is undefined as yet. So my advice for the sort of departing advice tonight was going to be to open yourself up to the opportunities that are in front of you. Because a lot of times you won't even know their opportunities until somebody says, hey, do you want to come work for us? Or have you ever thought about doing this or that? So I think it's important in times of uncertainty, such as a pandemic, that you don't allow yourself to get complacent or say, oh my gosh, this opportunity is not going to be there for me because this occurred. So there will be changes. Careers will look a little bit differently, at least in the short term. But I don't think that there's a career that as we sit here, that's not going to be on the table for somebody to pursue. You know, I actually think that there'll probably be new careers and new avenues that are opened up by this.
Yeah, I think this is a chance to kind of get out there and hustle. I mean, honestly, coming from, you know, the fact that you're coming out of school puts you in a position to go after jobs in a more creative way, and gives you the chance to sort of look at your career path a little bit differently. I mean, this is exactly what I did. I went into my career path in the middle of a disaster. I mean, I literally ran into the middle of it. But I think, you know, if you look back at the financial crisis at 2008, and Carole's story is so great. She said, where's the opening? Where's the nugget that I can fit in? And it doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be different. So I think coming out into the workforce now is your chance to say, maybe I work in a different industry or market, but use the same skills I've learned from Drew. Or maybe you know, this is a social justice platform. So if you have any kind of bent or inclination around helping people and getting resources to people, be that using your legislative lobbying background, be that using your writing background, be that using your a communications background. I think this is a chance to be innovative and creative, and that's what employers are interested in. And then Kevin also said, like, starting out in your career by volunteering. Maybe you take a few months and you look around and say, while I figure this out, while I get my feet underneath me, get some practical experience while you're sitting at home, saying like, hey, you know, for me, anybody who wants to work at home on social media or digital marketing, or someone who'd be willing to write some grants for free or learn how to write grants. Like, there are plenty of organizations that are looking to have help from their community. They might not be able to pay you right away, but again, using that, putting your human side forward first by being a good communicator and developing strong relationships, that's all a form of networking. And so I think you can really use your passion to help people to put yourself in a good position to get a job, you know, and just think outside the box a little bit.
I wanted to add to that. I really appreciate what Caitlin said. I agree. I think that at least in the business that I'm in, you know, which is mental health, you know, we're going to have more need after this pandemic than we've seen in a long time. And so the efforts, you know, going on now and the efforts that will be needed after are going to be monumental. And so I'm not concerned that there won't be work. I'm concerned that there won't be actually enough people trained to do the work. So I think thinking about ways in which you might, while at home, you know, whether it's volunteer or some training that may be useful in the end, that would be great. I also just want to hedge people to not be so scared that they decide to go back to grad school. I think that's a very common, at least after the 2000, and I was, you know, it started at USC in 2009, so I was in academia, but we did see a big push of people that went into grad school because they felt like the economy was bad, and so let me just go back to school. And it's not a great reason to go to school. Again, you should go to school because you know that this is something you want to do and you have the bandwidth to do it. And so I just if that wraps back to kind of the earlier part of the conversation, I would just say that don't let because we do not know what will happen, just don't let that pandemic be the driver of your decision making.
Mm-hmm. Carole, had you wanted to add something on this topic? You're muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to say two things. I echo everything that was said, you know, looking for the opportunity, and for graduates, people who are about to graduate, don't discount the value of your age. Organizations want good people who are young because they want your viewpoint. And it's hard to get and it's hard to find. And when they find young people like you who are interested in what the organization is doing and can express themselves and communicate clearly, you can be worth your weight in gold to an organization. And also don't discount the value of your amazing digital skills because you're digital natives and you quick pick up stuff faster than folks older than you can, and you're familiar with a lot of more platforms than the rest of us, you know, older folks are familiar with. As I've gone through my career, it's the younger folks who are always pushing me to continue to develop my skills. I've always been amazed at the digital skills of the folks younger than me. So give yourselves credit for your age and your abilities, and don't doubt that organizations really want that.
Thank you.
Can I add something unrelated? I was reflecting on a question that was asked towards the beginning of this about what was difficult about transitioning from being a student to the workforce. And as someone who's recently made that transition and was working entry-level jobs, I just want to put it out there that, like, it's a really hard transition. It's tough. It's a transition for sure. And I keep in touch with a bunch of my friends from Drew who graduated around the same time as me. And everyone had a hard time with that transition. I mean, it's just a very different environment. And you kind of go from thinking about many, many different things every single day and being asked to apply a lot of different skill sets and kind of having a criteria of how to succeed. And when you go into the workforce, it's just really different. There's not a strict criteria of like, if I do this, this, and this, I'll succeed. It depends so much on your managers and your teams. And, you might be doing work that you don't find particularly inspiring at first, even if it's for a mission that you're very inspired by. That was tough for me. I think it's tough for everyone. And something that I found useful was to keep kind of finding value even in the small things that I was doing. I think I found it really hard to go from discussing very lofty things in classrooms about the world writ large and society to, doing kind of the brunt work that nobody else wanted to do. And I think I eventually kind of came to terms with that by approaching it as finding like, okay, I'm going to edit this kind of whatever copy they've batted to me. I'm going to do the best edit I can possibly do. And I'm not going to complain when, this person who said they weren't going to ask me to get them coffee in this job asked me to get them to coffee. I'm going to bring that coffee to them, and then I'm going to ask them about their job, and I'm going to find a way to transition this into an opportunity to learn from them. So it's really hard, and I'm happy to talk with anyone who's kind of going through that transition as someone who went through that very recently. And I just kind of, I guess I would emphasize, try to just find that spark in whatever it is that you're doing, even if it kind of doesn't feel inspirational at first.
So you may not get your dream job right out of college. And one of the important lessons that they learn from people who are successful is those people, they do the job they have. And that creates opportunity for them.
I think also just to take the pressure off yourself that there is a dream job. I'm not sure what that even means. And I'm not sure that at 21, I would have guessed the job that I do and I love is absolutely not the job I would have told you I was going to do when I left Drew. I didn't even know what So I think that if we can relieve ourselves of the pressure of perceiving that there's something that you're going to land somewhere and there's never going to be high lows or there's never going to be high, right? Like everything comes with positives and challenges. And so I think just like a lot of other parts of our life, striving to be very good, but not worrying about being perfect, I think is really critical. And so I think if we perceive the dream or this perfect job, I worry that folks will be looking forever.
And I would add that you have to be nimble. You have to be ready to accept change and be willing to change with it. I never wanted to be a lobbyist ever, but I worked for a governor who resigned very quickly, and I had to figure out what I wanted to do. Thankfully, there were options there, and I took an option that just about everybody said I shouldn't, and it worked out. But there are different times in your life you can make mistakes and you can take chances, and if they don't work out, there's a backup plan. So I would say that being nimble along your career path in order to get to where you want to be or to achieve a goal that you've set for yourself is probably the best thing you can do along the way, in addition to working your tail off and doing the things you're supposed to do.
Thank you for that. And I think we have evidence from all of the panelists here that you can do all of those things and still stay true to your desire to do good in the world, to make a difference for others, to be true to your values. And so there is not a choice that anybody on this panel has had to make between being able to support themselves and being able to do work that mattered to them. And that to me is very inspiring to see. So thank you all for spending this time with us and for helping Drew students learn from your experience.
Can I just add one thing? I know, I mean, I want to thank all the alums that have been participating and also the students that are here. But just to add a little perspective to the whole picture is that we're all in the same boat together, and that one day, I mean, you're getting all of this wonderful advice and suggestions and networking input. You are all going to share and be in the boat in the place of the alums one day, very soon, sooner than you think, in helping others younger than yourselves. And it all comes around. I mean, it's just a wonderful way of mentoring. And I want to thank the alums, but also thank the students, and know that one day, very soon, you're going to be assisting others and your peers and others from Drew in their career choices and progress. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been really nice having you here and listening to you. I don't like to spotlight myself, but I will. Thank you so much for your time. It's really been invaluable. These alumni panels have been terrific, and the alumni support in Drew 110 has been remarkable as well. So thank you all. Thank you, students, for joining us. If you have suggestions for other folks you want to hear from, you know, we're working from home for a while, so send them off to me at cbassey@drew.edu and we'll put it together. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you,
And thank you,
everyone.
panelists.
Have a great evening.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Stay
Bye.
well, everyone. Bye.